Hi, everybody. I hope you're as excited to be at this conference as I am. This is the best few days out of the year. I think this conference has the deepest soul, and I know so many people come here to just see each other's faces and get their hugs, and obviously the rare disease stuff too. It's really special. I encourage you to meet people that you've seen online and to ask as many questions as possible. These amazing, famous experts on the panel today are not just here to tell you what they're good at and how awesome they are and how far they've come. They're literally here to serve you. So take everything that you can from them. I would encourage you to think about some questions. There are no dumb questions. They have been through it all, and they are worker bees. So ask them things that you're thinking about doing or that you think you can't do, and you might get some good ideas. Because again, they're here to serve you. And we're also here to talk about something that's, super core to the rare disease community, and that's about building and sustaining connections throughout. It's pretty easy to sometimes get in that slump and feel like you're the only one carrying a torch. So they're gonna help us go through the motions of activating people alongside you, whether it's through podcasting or social media or fundraising or sports ball, and they're gonna give you some good ideas. So I'm gonna let them all introduce themselves, and I'm so excited for you to meet them if you haven't already. Laura, start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lara Bloom, and I'm the CEO of the Ehlers Danlos Society. And I just want to talk to you today really about my story and our story as an organization to give people hope that you can really go from that kitchen table ma and pa setup to a really large global multi-million-dollar organization. And it doesn't have to take as long as you think, and it doesn't have to be as hard as it seems when you're at the bottom of that really tall mountain. Do you want me to talk about that now, or just?
Yeah, Laura, do you.
So I ran the UK organization for 5 years. And there was so much fragmentation, not just amongst the patient community and all of the different support groups that seemed to be battling each other and the condition and all the hurdles that were out there. And that just didn't make sense to me. But there was also fragmentation amongst the healthcare professionals, people not collaborating as much as you wanted them to. And I just thought, what can we do here to bring everybody together? And so in 2015, I left what was EDS UK, and I was speaking to the members of what was then the US organization, saying, I really think we need to build a global organization. I have no idea how we're going to fund it or what we're going to do, but I know it's needed desperately. And I put out a vision and a proposed mission and went around the world, literally speaking to doctors and other small national organizations saying, if we build this, will you come? And everyone was like, this is exactly what's needed. And yes, absolutely. And we just thought we were about to put together this thing that was going to generate funding really quickly, and it was exactly what everyone needed. And in 2016, we decided to close down what was the US organization, which was a pretty small organization, and relaunch as the Ehlers Danlos Society, which was global in its mission. And we put together an international consortium which brought together all of the healthcare professionals, and we built an alliance of all the national organizations in this effort to bring people together. And then we kind of sat back and said, okay, we're ready for the funding now, everyone. And it didn't come. And we, in our minds, knew we needed at least 6 or 7 figures to pull this dream together. And it was just not coming in, and we thought, okay, we need to build our shop window. And I always say you need to think of a nonprofit as a business, because it is, you're selling something, you need people to help you, and you need people to donate and support you. And that looks different in lots of different conditions, but it is ultimately storytelling, telling your story and getting people to invest and believe in what you're doing. And so the first thing I did was knowing that we needed someone great in marketing and social media. And we now, almost 10 years later, next year will be our 10-year, year after next will be our 10-year anniversary. I think we have around 3.5 million unique visitors to our website, and we have hundreds of thousands of people following us on our social media platforms. And I really think it was that took us from being a very, very small organization to what we are today. When we launched in 2016, it was me and one other person. By the end of this year, we'll have a team of 40 staff from the US and the UK. We're legally registered as a 501c3 in the US and as a UK organization. And all of these lessons along the way have all been driven through the power of social media and the power to bring people together, not just community members, but healthcare professionals as well, and critically donors. In 2018, we still hadn't received any significant funding. And I put out a kind of call to say, wouldn't it be amazing if we could raise $1 million a year? And at that time, I can't tell you what a pipe dream that was. We had received maybe $20,000 in dedicated research up to, I mean, it must sound familiar to lots of people in the room. $1 million felt like a number we would never achieve. And we thought, instead of just hypothetically saying we need money for research, we're going to put out a tangible proposal of what we believe is needed to be done and what that will cost. And within 48 hours, we had a donor commit to $1 million there and then. And people think I'm making that story up, but I am not. It is that concept of if you build it, they will come. Since 2018, by the end of this year, we would have funded $16.5 million in research through that concept, largely driven by social media and donors finding us through the power of our programs and what we're doing and telling the story of what we're doing and the impact that what we want to do will make. And I think it's the balance of that, what you are doing, but critically what needs to be done. And, you know, we're growing exponentially. It sometimes feels like we're still pinching ourselves because it's hard to catch up. But we started, it was just me and one other person part-time. So it can happen. And the reach is out there and the people are out there. You know, it felt like a dream come true when we had these donors. And that sum of money has been funded by under 10 individual donors. So you just need to connect to the right people that are impacted by these conditions and they can completely change your organization overnight. Through social media, we've recruited 18,500 people onto our global registry. We've taken part on enrolling 1,000 people from around the world into a hedge study, which was looking for the pathogenic variant behind hypermobile EDS. And we did that during a global pandemic through the power of social media and that online virtual enrollment. So that's what I would say to you. Look towards your virtual world, not just what's in front of you, and realize the power of that connecting in that virtual space and what can be done.
Thanks, Lara. We'll definitely be getting into some of that social media. I know it's pretty intimidating for some and just kind of overwhelming. So we'll get some hot tips from you. Samantha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Charleston. I am the Director of Programs and Community Engagement for the Orphan Disease Center, which we call ODC. ODC is a center of the University of Pennsylvania. It is a research-focused organization. We're outward-facing, so we look to facilitate rare disease research and drug development all over the world, not just at UPenn, certainly not just in the Philadelphia area. We are very much global in our efforts. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of different programming, and we sort of all wear a lot of different hats. But what I think is most relevant for this conversation is to mention our $1 million bike ride, which we call MDBR. And I think some of you may have heard of it. I know Effie's part of the MDBR. Yeah, it's our kind of pride and joy at the ODC. And why it's relevant to this conversation is because in order to get this bike ride up and running, we need money. And so a lot of what I do for ODC is to painfully, consistently ask for money all the time to anyone who will give it to us. And it's a tough road, as I'm sure a lot of you know, but it is incredibly rewarding. And so our bike ride is essentially made up of 33 different teams. The teams each represent a different rare disease, and they are tasked with raising a minimum of $20,000. And if they can do that, the Orphan Disease Center will match it. That money then is used for research grants, one-year pilot grants on those rare diseases. We've been doing this event for 11 years. And what makes it so special is that it's an event that sort of incorporates many different rare diseases, not just one. Much like this summit, it's a unique opportunity for different communities to come together and learn from one another and network and meet each other for the first time. It's incredibly special, costs a lot of money. And in order to really put on this event, that's kind of where I come in to solicit sponsorship and raise money, which, as we know, in this space is very challenging. And so I've had to get really creative over the years. And what I do is I put together a story. I put together a pitch. And what that looks like is my angle is to find something that is the most compelling. And to me, to us at the ODC, the most compelling story is the truth. And the truth is, as we know, this is not news to anybody, but rare diseases are neglected. They are underfunded and underrecognized. And, historically, and certainly since, in the post-pandemic world, companies, biotechs, biopharms have dropped, shelved, completely suspended their rare disease programs. Their rare disease portfolios are dwindling. And the interest, the funding isn't really there. And so the situation is incredibly dire. And what I do is I put together a story to emphasize just how dire it is. And I look to the community, to all of you guys, to put together that story using your beautiful, painful, daunting, but hopeful stories about what it means to fund rare disease research and the impact that it would have on these families. And so a lot of the work that I do is putting those stories together, being honest about the state of the field, the state of fundraising in this space, and using it to sort of energize people on the other end of my emails, my Zoom calls, my application forms for sponsorship dollars, and trying to find a way to make it personal to them and really tie in the work that they're doing. They're doing it for a community of people, many of whom they've never even met or seen. These people are often in business development offices or in labs pipetting and have never met a rare disease patient in their lives. And so it is my goal to bring those stories directly to the people who have the funds and the means to actually facilitate and drive drug development and rare disease research. And I can talk more about how we do that, but I'll stop there for now.
Rob.
Thank you.
Hey,
Effie.
Rob.
Hi, Effie. So glad to be here. You guys are awesome. So I will talk quickly about uplifting athletes. We do a few things. For the sake of this conversation, I'll talk about our Uplifting Experiences program. This is something that we as an organization, for those who don't know about uplifting athletes, our mission is to harness the power of sport to build a community that invests in the lives of people impacted by rare diseases. How we do that through our Uplifting Experiences program is really connecting with the network of athletes and athletic organizations that we've been really fortunate to build relationships with over the years and leverage those relationships to support individuals and families impacted by rare diseases. This is a program that in 2022, we sought to relaunch. We were incredibly fortunate to receive a grant from our friends at Santa Fe that helped us kind of get this program rolling. And in that first year, we were able to pilot the program. We had 10 events, hosted about 170 people through those 10 events. And we were able to partner with organizations like the NFL, Major League Soccer, the NHL, the WNBA, National Women's Soccer League. And then we also have a network of now 40 different colleges and universities that we work with across 6 different sports. And so in that first year, we were thinking about how can we leverage all these great relationships. We piloted the program. So in 2023 was the first full year of the program. And we said, all right, we're going to try and double what we did the first year. So we set a goal and said, we're going to do 20 events this year. We wrapped up 2023 by holding 31 events and had 390 individuals come through the program. So we overshot our goal a little bit, which is great. And then as we're sitting here having this conversation in 2024, the third year of the program, we have hosted 60 events this year, and over 700 people have come through the program. And so for us, this is a great way to build engagement for individuals and families impacted by rare diseases. It is so important, I think, to have that human connection, to have that ability to interact with somebody in person who has that shared and lived experience. And so I think what's really cool about the Experiences program is that we have really 3 ways that we activate these experiences. And The first is the traditional kind of game day experience. For us as an organization, we take care of everything from the moment that that family leaves their house until they return home. And we provide parking, tickets to the game, concessions, whatever is needed for that family to have a great time. Oftentimes we're fortunate to be able to include things like sideline passes or being able to throw out the first pitch at a baseball game. But all these kind of unique opportunities that we try to provide for the families on a game day is really something that's exciting. And the second type is by doing some kind of practice visit or stadium tour, getting a behind the scenes look, guided tour by a player or an athlete to be able to see what it's like for a day in their life. And then the third type of experience is candidly probably one of my favorites, is our special events. And these are often times where we take the athletes out of their natural environments and we go and do something that's exciting but involves them and supports the families as well. A couple of my favorite things, last weekend we went bowling with the Northwestern football team. It's a great opportunity for these families to just engage, kind of have the time to spend with these athletes, let their guard down, and really just learn about each person as they are as humans and the journey that they've been on. And I think the cool thing with this is that it doesn't have to always be a sports event. A couple months ago, we did a tour of the aquarium in Charleston, South Carolina with the Charleston Southern football team. And so it's these athletes welcoming families impacted by rare diseases and doing activities that are engaging and fun for the community to be a part of. And so I think when we talk about ways to activate the community, it's always important to think outside the box in ways that are good and positive for your community and the way that you serve them.
See, they're so awesome. We were lucky enough to actually join Uplifting Athletes for an event once, and I'm still sparkling from it. I got to invite 2 little boys who were also in wheelchairs. We took up all the parking at the stadium, and they treated us like gold, and they played with our kids while we actually got to watch the game, which was quite an experience. But Rob, you just mentioned that it's not just about the sports, and it's not just about the events and the activities, but it's actually about the connections, right? And the long-lasting relationships that you build. So for people thinking like, oh, okay, I'm more of an activity person, I'm more of an event type person, what advice do you have to help them sort of get that off the ground, to make those connections and sustain them, and not just have a bunch of one-offs when they're gathering together for things?
So I think one of the things that's really important is thinking about what the activity or event is. I think when we've developed the Experiences program, we are trying to make sure that we're creating events that are inclusive for our community, right? So there are things that they can engage with or experience that is a unique opportunity, like going on the field and watching batting practice at a Major League Baseball game. Those are the types of things that we're trying to create, those memorable experiences, and find ways that we can provide those inclusive opportunities. So as these disease-specific organizations that you guys are all leading and creating are working towards building events, think about the different ways that you can activate your community, whether it's something like a painting event or working with clay or finding something musically inclined that you can do with that community. There's all these different ways that we are fortunate to use the mechanism of sports, and that's kind of what our niche is, but there's so many different ways that you can do this, whether it's going to an aquarium or a zoo. Those things that are so memorable, and to your point, Effie, it's not just always about the experience itself, it's the opportunity to meet individuals who have that shared lived experience. We've had a couple really neat happy accidents, I guess, with our experiences where families have met each other and met somebody else with that disease for the first time at an uplifting experience. And I think those are the types of things when you just get out there and do things and put the opportunity out there, amazing things will be able to happen and be able to build upon that.
Can I just speak to that as well?
Of course.
So, I think people don't realize the power of coming home to your community, whether that's meeting one other person or a room full of people. And when we've put on events in the past, whether they're small support groups, even virtual support groups, the connections that you can make long live that one-off event. And we've known children that have met through a kids and teens program at a conference, and they've become best friends for life. We've had people that have got married meeting at conferences. So you never, I think it's so important to never underestimate the power of connection, whether that be at an aquarium, in a freezing cold air-conditioned conference room. You just never know. Gotta love the US for their AC. But I think it's so important to facilitate that connection. And so many people that I meet at this conference especially always talk about how they're working towards an event of some kind of conference, a meeting, a support group, because I think that universally across every condition, having that moment of meeting someone that is going through what you've gone through, there's nothing more powerful and validating than that.
Amen. Yeah, I was going to make everybody move up closer so we could get some body heat up here, but I
That'd be
forgot.
good. In the screens.
Samantha, I'm going to kind of pivot back to sponsorships and grants and money and fundraising and pounding the pavement, and I know how much burnout that can cause and how exhausting it is. And I also know that the word pitching is a little intimidating and maybe has a little bit of misconception to it for families. So how can you make that term and the action of actually pitching and getting real life sponsors more attainable, relatable? Like what barriers are there that might necessarily not be as intimidating as they think they are, so families could go and get maybe those bigger dollars and those bigger sponsors and keep them over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I will say, and this is kind of goes back to what Lara was saying about social media. Your stories are incredibly impactful and incredibly compelling. And again, it's not just the sort of scary and unknown and heart-wrenching or component of that story, but it's also the hope and the beauty and the beautiful, depictions and photos and videos that we see on the internet that I can tell you firsthand have caught the attention of my organization that does fund research grants in addition to looking for money. We take notice of those things. Seeing your stories and however you do it, it doesn't have to be some fancy marketing team. I am the fancy marketing team for the Orphan Disease Center, and I assure you it is not very fancy. It doesn't take a lot to put together what I'm calling a pitch, but really it's a narrative, it's your story, it's your truth. And as I said, the truth is really compelling and it's really valuable. And hearing those stories is really rewarding. Telling those stories, I imagine, is really rewarding. And we also hear a lot of no's, and I know you guys hear a lot of no's, and that can be really intimidating. But, science is a slow burn, and that kind of progress takes time. And so every little small bit and every little action you take matters. And even if that means just posting some photos or putting together a little video that you took on your iPhone and sharing it with the world, or putting it in an application form for a company to get a grant or a foundation, like I said, the people on the other side of those Zoom calls and those emails need to see it. They want to see it. They want to see you guys and your stories, because they want to put a face to the diseases that they're working on. They want to understand who they're working for. I mean, these people care, they're passionate, that's why they're in this industry. And I think it gets really tainted because, a lot of these companies that you're seeking money from are profit-driven and they're looking for commercial viability. And as we know, there are over 10,000 diseases and the market size is small. And so it's not as appealing. But bit by bit, I've seen it as you chip away and start to tell your story and put yourselves out there, people recognize that and see that and want to be a part of it. It becomes rewarding on the other end too. And so, for example, with our bike ride, what we try to do, a really big component of trying to get sponsorships, is we encourage those companies, whether or not they actually donate, to come to our bike ride. This is the heart and soul of everything we do with the Orphan Disease Center. Sort of culminates in this amazing day in June where there's music and there's ice cream and face painting, and there's a balloon guy, and there's a bike ride, and there's a walk, and it's like a zillion people everywhere, and kids running around, and it's a really special day. And what we try to do is bring our sponsors to come see it for yourself. See what we're talking about, be a part of this experience. You will not walk away disappointed. It is so rewarding. We ask them to volunteer. We ask them to get behind the registration table and check people in and hand out their goodie bags and pass out water bottles. We ask them to ride their bikes if they want to. It's a really good opportunity for companies to do team building exercises. And, they have a lot of, social responsibility things that they need to fulfill themselves. And so it's just a really great way to get them to put in their community service hours. Come ride a bike or come volunteer, pass out water, ice, and ice cream and meet our families. It's incredibly impactful. They start talking to you guys and learning from you and then really understanding why they're doing the work they're doing in the first place. And so there are barriers. It is really daunting to just send an email or submit an application on a pharmaceutical company's website for a grant that you don't think you're ever going to get. But tell your story. And when I say put together a pitch, I mean tell your truth. Share the really, really hard stuff and the really hopeful things. And one of the things that we like to do when I put together these stories is I ask our community members to tell me why this funding matters to them, what has it done, and I use that data and I say, look, X dollars has resulted in 5 publications and identification of biomarkers in an animal model, or they developed cell lines, whatever it is. Every little anecdote is part of the bigger story, and it matters, and it's impactful. And I'll just say, we've raised, in 11 years, $1.1 million in sponsorship. Now, that may sound impressive to some of you, and like pocket change to some, the rest of you. But what I will say is, what is impressive is that those sponsorship dollars have allowed us to fund nearly $23 million in research grants. We couldn't do it if we didn't have sponsors helping us to put on these events. And so every little bit makes a much bigger splash. It's a slow burn, but there's a lot of reward with that.
It's not surprising that storytelling has been sort of the common thread that all 3 of you have mentioned. But maybe this for you, Lara, and you, Rob, as well. We know that the vulnerability and the authenticity of our story is so important, right, in captivating people and getting them on our team. But how do you sort of balance that vulnerability in telling your story and that emotional toll that it can take on you, and also feel like you're giving something away that's so personal that it can also sort of take away from you at the same time? So how do you tell your story in a way that's not going to burn you out and make you feel numb?
It's a really great question. I think the one thing that people do feel is almost the validation of telling their story, because so many people have been on such a long odyssey of not being believed, of being bounced from doctor to doctor, of not being able to get their narrative and their full truth across, that when you give someone the opportunity to share that, you're actually inundated with people that want to do it. We've had a time many years ago where we would proactively seek people to share their story. It then we had so many people wanting to share their story with us, we had to create a process on our website where people can submit a form and share their story. And we have a waiting list of people to share their story. So I think it's important to remember that people want to share their story, as painful and as hard as it is, because what comes out of it on the way up of things is much more positive. And I just want to speak to the funding as well in terms of storytelling, because we think about the community telling their story to try and raise funds. In the Ehlers Danlos world, at the Society, since we launched nearly 10 years now, I think we've received under $100,000 from industry. There are no therapeutics in EDS, there's no medication out there, so they're just not interested in us. So we had to think of novel ways to attract funding and to get money in. And as I said, largely that's come from individual donors, that we've been very lucky that we've put out our beacon of our lighthouse out there on social media, and people have seen the light and come and found us. But we had to think of novel ways of how we can keep those donors invested and interested, because you get donor fatigue at the end of the day, but equally allow the researchers to tell their story. Because what we were finding is these donors had very specific things that they wanted to fund. They're largely parents who are driven by the need to want to help something that is specific to their child. But we knew that if you fund perhaps a slightly different area or a slightly different type of EDS, that the benefits would be found everywhere. But without giving the researchers that opportunity to tell their story, we were missing a trick. So last year, I was in the bath. Bear with me, it's going somewhere. It's where I get most of my good ideas. And I was laying there, and I was like, what if we did like a Shark Tank, Dragon's Den type thing? What if we brought all of our donors together and gave all of our researchers the opportunity to pitch their ideas without there being any driving focus coming from the donors themselves? They just get to hear everything. So this year we launched our Research Inner Circle. We charge donors to take part. Believe it or not, they pay $1,000. And we do that not because it's any significant money, but it allows people to understand what they're entering into, and that there is an expectation of giving. Because a lot of people just want to get in front of a researcher to ask questions about their condition. And we've raised nearly $3 million since the beginning of this year in that process. And that was just amazing new way of thinking, thank you, of how can we keep driving this interest. And we've had things funded that would never have been funded if we were just trying to, listen to what donors wanted to fund and seeing what was out there. It opened the opportunity to the whole world, and we have every quarter a call, and we have 5 to 7 presentations each time. Each one is in the room on their own, the virtual room. Each donor and the researcher has to sign NDAs. It's a very protective scientific space. But think about ways like that outside the box, where you can allow every person involved to tell their story, because we're all buying into stories every day, whether we're being sold food or drink, candy, heartbreaking stories. It's all about telling that story in an impactful way.
Rob?
So just on the other side of the storytelling, and I understand firsthand, oftentimes when I was telling my story, I was talking like most of us do, or talking about the worst days of our lives. And in the interest of protecting you, the individual telling that story, I would encourage you to make sure that at the end of the day, you are taking care of yourself, both mentally, emotionally, physically, because there are people, whether it is you, the person impacted, whether it is you, the primary caregiver or supporter or provider, there are people that rely on you. And so if we give and we give and we give, that tank will run out. I learned that the hard way, and I think it's important for us that while these stories are incredibly powerful and compelling, and people enjoy hearing them because they are so unique and powerful, I want to encourage all of you to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and finding, whether it is a therapist, preferably a therapist, or a friend that you can talk to make sure that you get to a point where your story is something that you're capable of telling without emptying your glass or using your spoons to be able to share that. That was a tough lesson for me in my journey, and just understanding that as Uplifting Athletes was going and moving along, and I had this role of being the executive director. And it was like, all right, well, you need to tell your story of how you went from I thought I was going to be playing in the NFL literally 1 week, and then the next week I wasn't sure if I was going to live because of a brain cancer diagnosis. And I think for me there was a lot of really deep-seated trauma in that journey, and so it took me years and the right support network and the right therapy to get to a point where I was like, okay, I can go and tell this story and then not want to go crawl into my bed and not talk to anybody for 3 days. And I think we as a community have incredible amount of pressure thrust upon us at times. And so it is important that in this journey, you are taking care of yourself so that you can continue to be there for those around you. It is, again, something that I learned in this process, and it took me years. I wasn't always comfortable being on stage and sitting up here and be like, hey, like everything's been great. But it's a part of that process. And I think to what Samantha and Lara have said, at the end of the day, that authentic journey that we've been on is not something that you can make up. It is something that is incredibly personal. It's incredibly human. And people respond to that. People respond to authenticity and understanding somebody's perspective. And so when you're doing the task of telling your story, whether it's to get people to sign up for something or to engage or to give money, you'll understand that when you go through that process, not everybody's going to get it. And that's hard. But not everybody's going to understand. Not everybody's going to be able to empathize with your journey, especially people outside of this room. When you get in front of people, they're not always going to, it's not always going to resonate. And that's going to be hard. That's probably harder than somebody who does understand and does resonate and says, no, I can't help you. I can't give you money. But I understand what you've been through. And so in all of this, when you go down this path, make sure there is that part of you taking care of yourself so that you can continue to be there for the people that you need to be there for.
Amen. Yeah. It would be nice if it had a system and it was just transactional, but it's so personal, it's so human, which is actually the beautiful piece in the end. Anyway, you spoke about self-care, Rob, and I think there's so much that goes into what that really means. But part of it that I try to stress too for parents is obviously it's asking for help, but more importantly, accepting it. And so I wonder, with what you're all doing in building these communities and sustaining them and asking for money, how have you delegated or encouraged people to show up, and carry something with you? Like, what are the ways that you activate people to volunteer with you, and not only once, but to come back? How do you keep those donors and keep those volunteers to really feel like they're a part of this and be empowered to continue on at every event that you have?
I think that you need to deeply care for everyone impacted that you come into contact with. When we have a donor, no matter how big and small, you have to remember what has incentivized them to give. And so often it's a personal story. And so for me, it's listening and just really understanding why people are there that are allowing you to run the organization that you're doing. We all are driven by our personal narratives, and I live with EDS. It's how I came into this world. But I very rarely tell my story, very, very rarely. In 15 years of doing this, I think I've done it under 5 times where I've really stood up and told my story of my diagnostic odyssey. And I choose to protect myself in that way, because that's how you can keep going, I think, and sustain yourself to keep running an organization, traveling all over the world when you're living with a condition yourself, and showing up and being there to tell the story of everyone else. And I think that is something that is difficult, but helps you to sustain it, because it's difficult and it's painful, and you lose people along the way, and you hear heartbreaking stories. But I think if you just keep listening and you keep being kind and being there for everyone that you come into contact with, the researchers that enable you to even do this, the donors, the community members, everybody around you, because it truly takes a village. And I'm rubbish at delegating. It took me years, genuinely years, to learn that I didn't have to do it all myself. Because when you go from running an organization, so many people here I know can relate. When you're doing everything, you're doing the marketing, you're doing the events. I remember one of our first events in Europe, I was checking people in, I was doing the shop, I was doing the speaker introduction, I was doing the coats, I was doing the... And now we have a whole team. And I like to always remember that moment of when it was just you. and being grateful of everyone around you that now allows it to happen naturally. If you delegate and let people help you, it's so much richer and it's so much better.
I would just say making sure, especially with volunteers, being intentional about what you need and what they're capable of providing. I think there's wide range of volunteerism from supporting like skill-based volunteers, somebody that's an expert in marketing or social media and providing that insight. There's showing up to events and supporting, and like Lara said, doing check-in, doing codes, tickets, all that kind of stuff. I think just making sure that the most precious thing that we have on this earth is time. So if somebody is going to give you theirs, just be respectful of that and be intentional about how you would like to use that time. Does it have to be a perfectly, fully formulated plan? No. And I think even communicating that up front, if somebody says, hey, I want to help, I don't know how I can help, but let me help. Say, great, here are some of the challenges that I have. Anything sound interesting to you? So I think there's that intentionality about being able to work with volunteers, and I know for us at Uplifting Athletes, we wouldn't be where we're at without volunteers and people willing to donate their time and support. And so I think just the intentionality and the openness and candidness, authenticity to bring that back up of, hey, this is where I'm at. Maybe I am trying to do it all myself, and I need to relinquish some of these tasks. And you have to, as the person delegating that, you have to accept that somebody is not going to necessarily do it the way you would do it the first time, and that's okay. And learning that and helping to work with them and communicate in that process. And so there's so much that is goes into that, and being able to work with those volunteers is what allows us to take those next steps.
And I would just add too, it's not hard typically to find one super passionate person or super caring person, and that person usually knows other passionate, kind, caring, helpful people. And so asking those really trusty volunteers to recruit other really trusty volunteers is really helpful. People like to be in charge, so where you can put people in roles of, delegate to those people to own a task and run with it, people like to be in charge. So people like that. If you can empower your volunteers, they will want to do a good job. And I also think, and a lot of the things that we're talking about in these events, they speak for themselves. I mean, it's, as I said before, so rewarding to be part of something on behalf of this community that I think you will retain volunteers just by virtue of coming to one event. They will see what you're doing and see what they're a part of and feel the impact they're making, and they're going to want to come back. That's been my experience.
Yeah, 2 points that really stuck out there to me was people might not do it the way you do it, but it can still get done. And that goes back into the burnout thing, right? If you're going to have to be in charge and control everything. So letting that go a little bit. And then something you said that's totally gone now, Samantha, but it was really profound in the moment. Oh, I know what it is. Yeah, making them ambassadors, right? Like telling them to tell a friend, telling them to tell a family, making them shout out to the rooftops about what they're doing and what impact they're making, and like these amazing people that they're working with and the cool stories that they hear. Like encourage people to go out there and do that work, whether it's on social media or in their family newsletters or at school or a presentation, in front of the kids. Like encourage people to go out and be your army, because it's just going to bring you all together in the end so much more, and you feel that community. Community is such a feeling, and I think that you can get it from that. I'm going to open it up into questions in a minute, but real quick, I just want to know from all three of you if there's anything from the beginning of building your community from the ground up when this started, what is one thing that you would do differently?
I would get whoever Lara had to do her social media.
Yes, same.
You can't have her. I would probably be willing to relinquish that control a bit earlier, and help and accept help that was there and try and let go a little bit.
It's a good one.
I think I would be I think I am now, but I think in the beginning I would have been a little bit more sort of relentless with my outreach for fundraising and not necessarily taking no for an answer. I think there's a way to appropriately really advocate hard and be creative and find ways to engage people you wouldn't have otherwise thought. And knowing what I know now, I think there are a lot more opportunities out there than I would have originally thought.
I think when it comes to building capacity, and whether it's volunteers or employees or board members, not only focusing on hard skills, but focusing on who they are as people and making sure that there is an alignment in the values of your organization and the culture of what you want to surround yourself with and the people you want to work with. I think you should be excited about the people you get to work with each day. And I think that's a really important piece, because I will speak for all of us, have, I think, awesome things that we get to do each day. There are still difficult things that you have to do each day. There's things that are mundane and are not fun to do and can be redundant. But if you're around good people, that at the end of the day always will keep you going.
Yes, I love that. Accept help, be bold, and find the gifts in everyone so it all works together. I love that. Okay, I hope there are some questions in the room or in the chat. I'd love you to take advantage of these amazing people while you can. There's about 12 minutes left. If you have anything you want to ask them, if you have an event coming up or something stewing, maybe get some of their advice for it.
So we have a few in the app, if you don't mind my asking. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your vulnerability about telling stories. That was such a wonderful conversation. It happens to be one of our questions in here. But also to let everyone know that Daniel DeFabio has created a Rarely Told Stories toolkit with the help of many, many people who are very expert at that, including Effie. And that he also has a Rarely Told Stories workshop during this event. And Suzanne Edison has a storytelling workshop. So clearly that's in the air. Suzanne Edison's workshop is at HEF. But the question is, how do you, and maybe you feel like you've answered this, but how do you approach telling stories without exploiting people whose stories are being told and making them feel poor and helpless?
I think the most important thing is communicating with, like Lara said, like opening it up for people who want to tell their story. I think is the most important thing. Is somebody has to be comfortable in that, and not going up to somebody and say, "Hey, I know what you've been through. You're going to talk about it." So I think there's the approach of which is really the important piece of that. And I think in that journey, always communicating. If at any point, like, you don't feel comfortable, like, this is your story, you don't have to keep going, or you can leave out things that you don't feel like you're ready to talk about yet. And I think making sure that those things are clear to the individual who you may be asking or who may be volunteering to tell their story is that element of communication and understanding that, hey, like, if you want to be here, we'd love to have you. We'd love for you to share your story and your journey, but we want you to do it on your terms.
Yeah, you can't ever share anyone's story without explicit permission, verbally or written. So whatever you're doing to collate stories, whether it's conversationally or in a form or embedded in a website, you have to always get consent to do that, always.
So she's asking, how do you tell the story of what you and your family and your child are going through while also protecting their privacy and your family's privacy, but getting the story out enough to have that impact? And later on, maybe depending on your kid's cognitive ability, if they'll see that story later, how are they going to feel about it? So maybe how do you find that balance of, I guess I'll answer that since I'm the parent here. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so personal, and I think that it totally depends on your situation with your child, right? So my son Ford, he can say a few words now, which is awesome. He has some intellectual disability. I know Ford's not going to hear my podcast someday and be like, I cannot believe you said that, Mom. That isn't the case for some kids. And I've seen some parents, go really hard and tell that story for a couple years, and then they said, you know what, I just don't feel right doing it anymore, and I've asked my child, and they're okay with it, but I just feel a little differently now. And I think that the important thing is to just always check in and to make sure that you're being intentional and being honest with yourself. I think if you ever feel like you're pandering with your story, that you need to reevaluate and take a pause. But I think that deep down, you trust your gut and you communicate with your kid if you can. And I think that if you're always going in it with the right intentions and with the right plans, that mostly good is always coming with you too. And also to remember that you're going to be a lifeline for someone at some point. And maybe you just told your story once and then you stopped. You still did it and you made a difference somewhere.
And you can always depersonalize a story. So you can talk about your child and you don't have to give names or show faces, and it can be just as powerful. I think that's also an option as well.
We have a question.
Do you have advice for those families that have kids that don't want to be engaged with the community anymore? The way it was explained to me is if they live in the pretend world, that they're not part of the community, then it means they're okay and everything is going normal. So they're trying to shy away from the community.
Are you asking the families that aren't involved anymore, or?
So the parent, for example, would be still involved, but the child or teenager or young adult no longer wants to be involved.
That's
now
very
that they have
common.
choice.
We see that a lot. So as kids, they could have come to our conferences for, a few times. Suddenly they hit teenage years, don't want to know, don't want to talk about my condition, don't want to have anything to do with it. Just have to respect that that's what they need and want in that moment. And what could be a support to one kid might make the other feel much worse. A lot of people choose to live in a form of denial by not putting themselves into the community. And if that's their way of coping, then you have to support that. Because not everyone is supported by being around people that it's almost like your reality. And this is the other thing that I think a lot of people struggle with. When you do come to events, you see the spectrum. You see the best case, but you see the worst case. And that can be really frightening. And so a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to subject themselves to the spectrum of what could be, because it might not be where they're at right now. So sometimes denial can be a comfort. I don't think there's any right or any wrong.
Yeah, and I would just say always keep the invite open, right? And make it as soft of a landing as possible when anyone ever wants to come back. Mm-hmm. But to also remember that it's not just us who needs to be around people like us. The kids need to be around people like them. The siblings need to be around people like them. Everybody is going through the grieving process in every aspect, whether it's the parent or the patient or the sibling or the grandma. So really encouraging them to go find that piece of their community separate from the collective.
Can we squeeze in one more question? This is from online. Can anyone speak to how to find donors? Where do we look to avoid wasting precious time and resources?
Samantha, help us.
How to find donors? That's the question. Yeah. Again, I'm going to say get creative. And I think that this is going to require some precious time, which may feel like it's been wasted, but there is some sort of upfront legwork to really looking at your resources and your networks and thinking outside the box. I can tell you that putting families and patients in front of people has been incredibly powerful in terms of getting financial support, because like I said, like we've been talking about, the stories are powerful, but that's not always going to be the case, and that's not always easy to do. And so truly what I do, in addition to scouring the internet and identifying companies, anyone who might be interested, whether or not they work on the diseases that I'm representing, I look at law firms, I look at real estate companies, I look at local businesses, I look at, city governments and see if they have a budget that might want to be, that might help us. I look everywhere. Your personal networks, your colleagues and their networks, your families and their networks. Everybody knows somebody who might be interested, who might have money, and kind of, Lara had said, it often is a few people with means who are super interested and supportive. It does take a little bit of work and a little bit of creativity and thinking not just sort of the big companies and looking at what their budgets are and what their sponsorship opportunities are, but also looking a little bit smaller, looking in your local communities and putting the word out there. And again, having an event and sort of engaging people might spur them to be, oh, you know what? I want to support this, or I know somebody who might be really interested in supporting this. It's a lot of grassroots efforts, but it's absolutely worth it in the end. So it's not a straight answer, but it does take a little bit.
Can I just add as well, a bit of controversial, different approach. Our strategy is not to find donors. Our strategy is to do everything we can for donors to find us. Because we've never found a donor. Like when we've called corporate sponsors, it's brought in 5 to 6 figures if we're lucky. Like really not anything that's made an impact to our organization. The donors that have given 7 figures have been the ones that have found us, called us, emailed us because of the beacon we're putting out from our lighthouse. I would put all of your time and capacity and funds into telling your story and to selling the programs you're doing, the events you're doing, the storytelling, the reason, the why, and they will find you. Because I didn't know that there were people out there with the capacity of giving that were impacted by EDS. That's not in the phone book. I mean, how do you find that? So you have to do whatever you can for them to find you.
Yes, be a lighthouse. Really. And I would also add, just on a small scale with your families, it's really helpful if they're okay with it to have that initial survey for when they join your community, or start it now, where you get obviously their name and their address and stuff, but ask them where they work, because you can find all the companies that do matching through that. And ask them where they work, and then also ask them their gifts, going back to the volunteering thing, and like what maybe you can plug people in for if they have the capacity at that time.
And in the US, there's wealth screening tools as well that you can utilize, and all you need is basic data information that you have to obviously get permission to have collected, but then you can do a wealth screen and it can tell you the capacity of giving in the donor base or database that you have.
And people know people. Talk to people here. People know people with means and who are interested in supporting this space, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and get out there on like amazing things like podcasts. Lara, you can reach everybody everywhere. Like, tell it there. You never know who's listening. I have 1,000 stories of I can't believe that person was listening from all over the world, and like what changed because of it. Like, think of different mediums and just plug and play and like get it out there, and then advertise it and encourage everyone to share your stuff all the time. Like that, if you can't do anything, if you can't come to our fundraisers, if you're so consumed and life is really hard, just press share. That helps.
I just want to add one thing. My boss saw a TikTok video of a family and their son who's living with a rare disease. Fast forward to now, we are helping support this family and funding a significant amount of research on this disease because of a TikTok video.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Put your story out there.
I think we've had a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Effie and Lara. Thank you, Samantha and Rob. We are going to move to lunch now, but we are grateful for all of you who have been here and contributed to the discussion.
Yes, thank you, everybody.